Welcome back, folks. Chris in Central Pennsylvania. African National Congress Secretary General Fikeni Mabalula proudly proclaims that the party still has friends in America. He's referring, of course, to Zoran Mamdani, the unaccomplished teenager who has taken over the rotten apple. It seems a natural fit for the African National Congress. After all, Zoran has proposed race-based taxation, spewed anti-Semitic hatred, demonstrated primary school critical thinking skills, promised free everything to buy votes, and is anti-white, anti-Christian. Most of that mirrors the ANC perfectly. So he's a natural ally, a Manchurian candidate in the rotten apple, if you will. In response to U.S. law enforcement arresting the fraud masquerading as Venezuela's president, whom the Justice Department extradited to New York, the ANC-led GNU in South Africa leaped to the alleged drug trafficker and confirmed human rights abuser's defense. Now, the reaction of the ANC-led government of South Africa would be comical if it were not so predictable. At a time when it's best to not intentionally irritate the most powerful country in the world, a nation that just executed a military and legal operation that in a matter of minutes exposed South Africa's totalitarian friends in Moscow and Beijing as toothless tigers, the ANC chooses to side with the devils. Russia's vaunted and heralded air defense systems proved worthless in protecting Venezuela, and a high-level visit of Chinese diplomats 18 hours prior to the raid proved how ineffectual China is as an ally in the Western Hemisphere. Now, Russia, a rogue state that constantly invades and undermines its neighbors, along with China, the home of the Cultural Revolution and extermination of millions of innocent people, as well as the ongoing human rights abuses directed at the Uyghur Muslims, these are Pretoria's friends. But what is stark here is the contrast in the reaction of the ANC when it comes to its pals' criminal activities, contrasted with the legal extradition of Maduro by the Justice Department. You see, Russia invades Ukraine and commits indiscriminate human rights abuses. China repeatedly attacks Vietnamese and Filipino civilian maritime traffic in international waters. And the ANC response? We are neutral. Nothing to say about these criminal acts. It's interesting how the ANC is silent when it comes to expressing anger over a conflict that has resulted in the deaths of more than 1 million people, but loses its mind when a usurper who stole 2 elections is extradited. There were 80 reported fatalities in the U.S. raid, including 32 Cuban interlopers. Now that's tragic. But Maduro was offered numerous opportunities to peacefully leave the country and avoid extradition over the previous 10 months. He chose arrogance and defiance instead. 2 behaviors one can easily attribute to the current instantiation of the African National Congress. Now, in the initial response from DIRCO, the foreign ministry, the government of South Africa notes with grave concern the recent developments which were confirmed by the United States of America that it has conducted a large-scale military strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been captured along with his wife and flown out of the country. South Africa views these actions as a manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations, which mandates that all member states refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. This is from Crispin Piri, the spokesman for DIRCO. Now, DIRCO also stressed the UN Charter does not authorize external military intervention in matters that fall within the domestic jurisdiction of a sovereign nation. So what was Operation Boleas when the ANC pretended to have Southern African Development Community top cover to invade Lesotho, or the frequent deployments of the SANDF to Comoros over the past 2 decades? South Africa's DIRCO called on the UN Security Council to urgently convene, which the body did on Monday, January 5th, 2026. This ANC appeal is another empty virtue signaling exercise doomed to failure, and yet another unwise move by a government demonically possessed, it seems, on a mission to antagonize Washington, D.C. On the 5th of January, the South African government felt compelled to write to the President of the United Nations Security Council, headed by Somalia at the moment. Mr. President, the unilateral military strikes carried out by the United States of America against Venezuela and the abduction of President Nicolas Maduro and his spouse from Venezuelan territory for transfer to the United States wantonly violates the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of Venezuela. These actions are also in stark contrast of our established legal norms. Once again, the belief that might is right is reinforced and diplomacy is undermined. Well, here the thing is it's not a belief, it's a reality, one which weak, powerless states try to wish away. No one stopped China from invading Korea in 1950, the communists from invading Vietnam in 1979, Tanzania from invading Uganda in 1979, South Africa from invading Lesotho in 1998, or Russia from invading Ukraine in 2022. It's not a belief, it's a reality. They continued in their letter. History has repeatedly demonstrated that military invasions against sovereign states yield only instability and deepened crisis. Unlawful, unilateral force of this nature undermines the stability of the international order and the principle of equality among nations. Such use of force also undermines the institutional infrastructure established to regulate relations among nations. We've seen examples of these in Libya, Iraq, and countless cases in Africa where foreign interventions and interference create security crises and undermine national governance institutions cultivated through nuance and complex national context. Interesting thing that they talk about unilateral action. Iraq was not unilateral. Libya was not unilateral. They were multilateral. Strange how they failed to mention that. One endorsed by NATO, the other endorsed by the United Nations. And they mentioned countless cases in Africa where foreign interventions and interference created security crises. You mean like when the South African National Defense Force intervened in the DRC repeatedly? Or Uganda intervened in South Sudan, creating security crises? Well, I would agree with you. They continued, Mr. President, each of our countries, including our peoples that are members of this organization that are bound to its charter, should have the right to determine their own democratic and political path. This inherent charter-given right to self-determination should not be abrogated. You believe in self-determination, but you seem to have issues with Western Cape secession and KZN secession. But I agree. It's a shame that the people of Venezuela have had those rights abrogated by a fascist, murderous tyrant for over a decade, stealing 2 elections, imprisoning political opponents, murdering demonstrators. One would assume the ANC to be on the side of the angels here, celebrating the removal of an imposter who oppressed his people. They continued, if we do not stand up to the sovereign rights of any nation states being undermined and wantonly violated, then which one of us are safe or are guaranteed protection by the principles of the Charter and international law? Folks, when a government oppresses its people, it loses any sympathy and surrenders its legitimacy. In such cases, external multilateral action, such as Iraq, Afghanistan, or unilateral action, Tanzania invading Uganda in 1979, Vietnam invading Cambodia in 1978, is warranted and often appropriate. Opinions inside the government of National Unity in South Africa are divided on this. The ANC, of course, they run the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO. They say the actions manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations. Of course, leader of the Freedom Front Plus, Dr. Corné Mulder, whose party is part of the GNU, posted on X that this strong condemnation from DIRCO and the ANC minister was expected. It will be done in all of our names, but it will not represent our views. The end of the socialist failure in Venezuela should be welcome. To which the ANC took him to task. The Democratic Alliance did not publicly comment on the incident, other than to say that politicians should refrain from reckless posturing on social media. That was likely directed at the Freedom Front Plus and not the ANC, where it should have been directed. They say it only harms South Africa's interests. South Africa's foreign policy must be genuinely non-aligned and in the national interest, and therefore officials must behave responsibly and credibly, says DA national spokesperson Jean de Villiers. Why must South Africa's foreign policy be non-aligned? Why can't South Africa be aligned with NATO? Why can't South Africa be aligned with the United States or with Kenya? Why must you be non-aligned? Where does that stupid position come from? You want to be on the outside looking in? You want to be the alien all the time? Why do you want to be non-aligned? It doesn't put you with the angels. But folks, the ANC can take comfort that opposition parties took umbrage with the U.S. action. The EFF called the intervention the most blatant act of imperial aggression in the Western Hemisphere in decades. Well, perhaps in the Western Hemisphere, but I kind of thought that China's ownership of the African National Congress, bought and forward paid politicians, was probably the most blatant imperial aggression I've seen in decades. Now, the EFF warned that more could follow. If the world remained silent, even President Ramaphosa could one day be targeted on the basis of fabricated narratives, including the dangerous and dishonest propaganda of so-called white genocide in South Africa. Indeed, given Ramaphosa's role as chairman of MTN when it funded state sponsors of terrorism that led to the murder of U.S. service members, it might very well indeed lead to that. At the same time, the EFF should take caution when it realizes that its party leader, Julius Malema, threatened to kill Donald Trump. I would not be surprised if there is a sealed indictment against Juju, just waiting to be executed for threatening the life of a U.S. president. The Secret Service and the Justice Department do not look kindly at that sort of behavior. If Malema is wondering why he was denied a visa to the UK, he should look no further than his stupid comments about killing President Trump. Now, the MK Party, of course, echoed EFF sentiments, calling the action a new kind of colonialism. MK Party said it rejected the U.S. narrative that the military attack constituted law enforcement or anti-narcotics operations. Instead, it illustrates with brutal clarity the true nature of Washington's foreign policy, militarized coercion in the service of resource control and imperial domination. Yeah, I keep saying that line. Simply not true. It didn't work in Iraq. We didn't get any oil. It's not working elsewhere. And that's an interesting take from a party full of corrupt has-beens from the ANC, a party which appears to be involved in illegal mercenary operations in support of Putin's war crime regime. Business Insider Africa made the following statement. For South Africa and many African governments, that difference is crucial. While the Nigeria dispute showed diplomacy could contain tensions, Venezuela now raises fears that unilateral force is becoming an accepted tool of foreign policy. Becoming an accepted tool? What planet have these people been living on? Are they publishing the newspaper from under a rock? From the violent expulsion of 13 million ethnic Germans at the end of the Second World War, the enslavement of millions of Eastern Europeans in the Soviet Union, the invasion of East Germany in 1953 by the Soviet Union, Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, South Korea in 1950 by the Chinese, the Falklands in 1982 by Argentina, and countless other actions, might makes right has always been the accepted tool. Constructivism is a leftist fantasy that has limited merit and only works when the powerful see self-interest in participation. International law is a farce when the powerful are involved. China simply ignores the 9-line verdict from the International Court of Justice imposed upon it in the South China Sea dispute. They simply ignore it and continue to assault, attack, and threaten the safety of commercial maritime traffic in the South China Sea. Europeans and the African National Congress praise the surrender of sovereignty to alien actors in remote locations like Brussels for the European Union and New York for the United Nations, whose officials live high off the hog and the sweat of the brow of the common man. Yet they're silent when China annually burns more coal than the rest of the planet combined. As far as ANC's argument in support of constructivism, the Motels said it best in their 1982 hit release song, "It's like I told you, only the lonely can play." South Africa could be friends with the most successful country in the world, but chooses instead to befriend a rogues assembly of tyrants, dictators, and murderous regimes, the likes of whom Genghis Khan would have been impressed with: China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, Venezuela, and Cuba. History will wash away the fantasies of leftists whose regimes and predecessors murdered tens of millions of people in the 20th century. In the end, history will judge the ANC and its rhetoric harshly. What say you, South Africa? Cheers.